The vampire king knocked and said, I was told you're alone. Let me give you sons, woman. Chapter 1. The knock at midnight. Rain had been falling for 3 days straight when the knock came. Alara stood at the kitchen sink of her grandmother's cottage, hands submerged in cold water, staring at nothing. The cottage sat at the edge of Thornwick village, tucked against the forest, where no one ventured after dark. It had been hers for 6 months now, since the funeral, since the scandal, since her fiancé had chosen her sister instead. She'd come here to disappear. The knock sounded again. 3 slow, deliberate strikes against the oak door. Alara's pulse stuttered. No one came this far out. Not at midnight. Not during a storm. She dried her hands on a threadbare towel, her breath misting in the cold air. The cottage had no central heating, just a dying fire in the hearth that did little against the autumn chill. She crossed the small living room, her footsteps creaking on the old floorboards, and hesitated with her hand on the bolt. Who's there? Her voice came out smaller than she intended. Silence. Then a voice, low and measured, speaking through the wood. I was told you're alone. Her stomach dropped. Those words weren't a question. They were a confirmation. I don't know you, Alara said, her hand tightening on the bolt. Leave. I'm afraid that's not possible. The voice remained calm, almost polite. There are men in the forest. They're coming for you. You have approximately 4 minutes to decide whether you trust me more than them. Alara's blood turned to ice. What men? Why would open the door? Miss Whitmore. He knew her name. She stumbled back, her mind racing. This was a trick. It had to be. But something in his tone, steady, factual, utterly devoid of threat, made her pause. And beneath the drumming rain, she heard it. Voices. Distant, but growing closer. Her hands shook as she threw back the bolt and yanked open the door. The man on her threshold was drenched. Rain ran in rivulets down a black coat that belonged to another century. High collar, silver buttons, tailored lines that spoke of wealth and old families. His dark hair was plastered to his skull, and his face was all sharp angles, severe cheekbones, a blade of a nose, a mouth set in a grim line. But it was his eyes that stopped her. Gray, cold as winter stone, ancient. Inside, he said, now. Alara didn't move. Who are you? Someone who can keep you alive. He glanced over his shoulder toward the forest. Possibly. The voices were closer now. She caught fragments through the rain, rough laughter, the snap of branches. She stepped aside. He moved past her with a natural grace, silent despite his boots, and she slammed the door shut. Her fingers fumbled with the bolt as he surveyed the cottage in one sweeping glance, cataloging exits, windows, weaknesses. Blow out the candles, he said. Lock the windows. Don't make a sound. I don't understand. Why are they? Your grandmother was not merely a midwife, Miss Whitmore. She was a gatekeeper. He turned to face her fully, and in the firelight, she saw that his skin was too pale, his stillness too perfect. She kept certain knowledge from crossing into mortal hands. Now that she's gone, there are those who believe you inherited that knowledge. I didn't. I don't know anything about. They won't believe you. The truth of it settled over her like a shroud. Her grandmother had been strange in her final years, secretive. She'd burned half her journals the week before she died, muttering about debts and old promises. Alara moved to the windows, yanking the curtains shut. What do they want? Names, locations, blood. He unbuttoned his coat with deliberate precision. Beneath it, his shirt was torn, and through the rent in the fabric, she saw something that made her breath catch. A wound, deep and vicious, carved across his ribs, but it wasn't bleeding. The edges of the gash were blackened, as if cauterized, and the flesh around it looked gray. Wrong. You're hurt, she whispered. Silver does that. His tone was matter of fact. It won't kill me, but it's unpleasant. Silver. The word hung in the air between them. Outside, the voices stopped. Alara's heart hammered against her ribs. The silence was worse than the noise. She could feel them out there, circling the cottage like wolves. The stranger moved to the window, peering through a gap in the curtains. 6 men, armed with crossbows and blessed iron. Not professionals, but zealous enough to be dangerous. Blessed iron? Alara's voice cracked. What are you talking about? He looked at her then, really looked at her, and something flickered in those cold gray eyes. Weariness, perhaps. Or resignation. Your grandmother made a bargain with my house 30 years ago. We protected Thornwick from certain threats. In exchange, she kept our existence a secret. He straightened, his jaw tight. Those men out there are from a rival faction. They want to erase anyone who knows enough to threaten them. Your house, Alar's voice was barely a whisper. What are you? Before he could answer, glass shattered, a crossbow bolt punched through the window, embedding itself in the wall inches from her head. She screamed, dropping to the floor as another bolt followed, then another. The stranger moved impossibly fast, faster than any human, and yanked her away from the wall. His hand closed around her wrist, cold as marble, and he pulled her toward the kitchen. The cellar, he said. Now, your grandmother was a gatekeeper. There's always a cellar. The front door exploded inward. 3 men burst through, faces obscured by hoods, weapons raised. The stranger shoved Alara toward the kitchen and turned to face them. She saw his shoulders shift, saw something ripple beneath his skin, and then he moved like liquid shadow. The first man went down without a sound, crumpling to the floor. The second managed a shout before the stranger's hand closed around his throat, lifting him off his feet. The third raised his crossbow, but the stranger was already there. Snapping the weapon in half with one hand, Alara watched in frozen horror as he disarmed them with brutal efficiency, never raising his voice, never losing control. When the last man fell unconscious, the stranger straightened, breathing hard. His eyes had changed. They glowed faintly in the darkness, reflecting the dying firelight like a cat's, and when he turned to her, she saw the truth written in every impossible line of him. The cellar. Miss Whitmore. His voice was strained now, rough. Before I lose what remains of my restraint, Alara ran. Chapter 2. Beneath the stone cellar door was hidden behind a false panel in the pantry. Exactly where the stranger said it would be. Alara's hand shook as she pried it open. Her grandmother's warnings echoing in her memory. Never go down there alone, child. Never at night. But the sound of footsteps crunching through broken glass above her head drove her forward. She grabbed the oil lamp from the kitchen counter and plunged into the darkness. The stranger followed, pulling the panel shut behind them. The space went black for a heartbeat before he took the lamp from her trembling hands and held it high. The cellar wasn't what she expected. It stretched far beyond the cottage's foundation, carved from bedrock and shored up with timber that looked centuries old. The walls were lined with shelves holding glass jars, leather-bound books, and things Alara couldn't name. Dried herbs bundled with red thread, copper bowls engraved with symbols, small bones arranged in careful patterns, her grandmother's secrets, laid bare. Keep moving. The stranger's voice was tight, strained. He pressed a hand to his wounded side, and in the lamplight, Alara saw his face had gone grayer, the veins beneath his skin standing out like dark tributaries. You're getting worse, she whispered. Silver disrupts the blood. It will pass. He moved deeper into the cellar, scanning the shadows. There's another way out. Your grandmother wouldn't have built a trap with only one exit. Alara followed, her mind still reeling. Above them, she heard boots on the floorboards, furniture being overturned, angry shouts. They were searching the cottage. They'll find the door, she said, eventually. He paused at a junction where the cellar split into 2 tunnels. But by then, we'll be gone. And then what? Alara's voice rose despite herself. You show up at my door, tell me I'm in danger, fight off armed men like it's nothing, and now we're running through tunnels under my grandmother's house. I don't even know your name. He turned to face her, and the lamplight carved deep shadows across his features. For a moment, he simply looked at her, studying her the way one might study a puzzle or a potential threat. Cashin, he said finally. House Noctis. First blood of the Northern Court. The titles meant nothing to her, but the weight behind them was unmistakable. First blood, she repeated. What does that mean? It means I'm old, Miss Whitmore. Old enough to have watched your village grow from a handful of huts to what it is now. Old enough to remember the bargain your grandmother's grandmother made with my house. He gestured to the right tunnel. This way. Alara didn't move. You're a vampire. The word hung between them like a blade. Cashin's jaw tightened. Yes. And those men upstairs? Hunters. Descendants of a mortal family who once served House Corvus before they were betrayed. They've spent generations trying to erase us from existence. He took a step closer, and Alara fought the urge to retreat. Your grandmother knew this. She chose to stand between us and them, to keep the peace. Now they think you have her records, names, safe houses, feeding grounds. They'll kill you to get them, but I don't have anything. I barely spoke to her in the last 5 years. I know. Something flickered in his expression, regret, perhaps, or sympathy. But they don't. Above them, a crash echoed through the ceiling. The hunters had found the pantry. Cashin's hand shot out, gripping her arm. Move, now. They ran. The tunnel twisted and dipped, the walls growing damper as they descended. Elara's lungs burned, her feet slipping on the uneven stone, but Cashin's grip kept her upright. He moved with airy confidence in the darkness, as if he could see far beyond the lamp's weak circle of light. How do you know where we're going? She gasped. I helped build these passages. 200 years ago, during the purge, he pulled her around a sharp corner. Your ancestor needed an escape route. We provided it. 200 years. The number made Elara's head spin. They emerged into a wider chamber, and Cashin finally stopped. He set the lamp on a stone ledge and leaned heavily against the wall, his breathing harsh. The wound on his side had begun to weep not blood, but something darker, thicker. What is that? Elara whispered, horrified. Poison. The silver was coated. He closed his eyes. Clever of them. You said it wouldn't kill you. I said silver wouldn't. His mouth twisted in something that might have been a smile. I didn't say anything about what they put on it. Panic clawed at Elara's throat. What do you need? How do I help? You can't. He slid down the wall until he was sitting, his head tipped back against the stone. The poison has to run its course. It will burn through my system in a few hours, or it will stop my heart. There's nothing to be done. That's not an answer. Elara knelt beside him, her hands hovering uselessly. There has to be something. Medicine. Magic. You're a vampire. You can't just die from a scratch. This is hardly a scratch, Miss Whitmore. Elara, she snapped. If you're going to die in front of me, the least you can do is use my name. That earned her a genuine look, surprised, almost amused. His eyes had dulled from their earlier glow, but there was still something unnervingly inhuman about them, something that saw too much. Elara, he repeated, testing the shape of it. Very well. She sat back on her heels, her mind racing. The chamber around them was older than the tunnel, the walls covered in carved symbols that looked disturbingly like the ones on her grandmother's shelves. Offerings, maybe. Or wards. Why did you come for me? She asked quietly. If I don't have what they want, why risk yourself? Cashin was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was soft or tired. Your grandmother saved my life once. A very long time ago. He pressed his hand harder against the wound. She could have turned me over to the hunters. She chose not to. I owed her a debt, and now you're dying to pay it. Perhaps. He met her gaze. Or perhaps I simply didn't want another innocent person to die because of what we are. Above them, distant voices echoed through the tunnels. The hunters had found the passage. Elara's heart sank. They were trapped. Cashin too weak to fight, her too human to make a difference. She looked around the chamber desperately, searching for anything that might help. And her eyes landed on a carved inscription above the doorway. By blood given freely. By trust earned truly. Her grandmother's handwriting. Cashin, she said slowly. What heals vampire poison? His eyes cracked open, wary. Blood. Fresh blood from a living source. It dilutes the toxin. From a human? Yes, but how much? Elara, how much? He stared at her. Enough to weaken you. Not enough to turn you. But enough that you'd be vulnerable. If the hunters find us, they're going to find us anyway. She pushed up her sleeve, exposing her wrist. You said you owed my grandmother a debt. Let me choose to pay it forward. For the first time since she'd met him. Cashin looked genuinely shaken. You don't understand what you're offering. Then explain it fast, because we're out of time. Chapter 3. The first. Mark Sassian looked at her wrist like it might burn him. It's not simple, he said, his voice rough. Once I take blood freely given, there's a bond. Temporary, but real. You'll feel what I feel: hunger, rage, the weight of centuries. It can break a mortal mind. Then don't take too much. Elara kept her arm extended, even as her pulse hammered against her throat. Just enough to survive. You're terrified. It wasn't a question. His eyes had fixed on the vein in her wrist, tracking the flutter of her heartbeat beneath the skin. I can hear it, smell it. Of course I'm terrified. But those men will kill me slowly. She swallowed hard. You'll just take what you need. The voices in the tunnel grew louder. Torchlight flickered against the stone walls, accompanied by the scrape of boots and weapons. They had minutes at most. Cashin closed his eyes, something like pain crossing his features. If I lose control, you won't. You don't know that. No, Elara admitted. But my grandmother trusted you enough to make a bargain that lasted 30 years. That has to mean something. He opened his eyes, and for a moment, she saw past the ancient coldness to something raw beneath, loneliness, bone deep and vast as an ocean. Your grandmother was a wiser woman than you're being right now, he said quietly, but his hand came up, fingers circling her wrist with surprising gentleness. His skin was cold, fever cold, trembling slightly. This will hurt, I know, and afterward, you may hate me. I'll take that risk. Cashin's grip tightened fractionally. He drew her wrist closer, and Alara forced herself not to flinch as he bent his head. She felt his breath first cold, barely there, then the press of his lips against her skin, not a bite. A warning. Last chance to change your mind, he murmured against her pulse. The torchlight was closer now. She could hear individual voices, arguing about which tunnel to take. Do it, Alara whispered. His teeth sank in. The pain was sharp and bright, a sting that blossomed into a deep ache. Alara gasped, her free hand clutching at his shoulder, but Cashin held her steady. She felt the pull as he drank, rhythmic, deliberate, controlled, and then something else flooded through her. His hunger.it hit her like a wave, vast and hollow and edged with desperation. Not for blood alone, but for connection, for warmth, for something to fill the emptiness that centuries had carved into him. Alara's vision blurred, her knees weakening, but beneath the hunger was something else. Restraint, iron-willed and absolute. He was holding back, fighting himself with every swallow. Cashin, she breathed, and his name on her lips seemed to anchor him. He pulled away abruptly, releasing her wrist. Blood stained his mouth, her blood, but his eyes had cleared, the gray sharpening to something almost silver. The wound on his side had stopped weeping, the edges already beginning to knit together. Alara swayed, and his hands shot out to steady her. Easy, he said, his voice stronger now. Sit. She let him guide her to the floor, her head spinning. The bite marks on her wrist were clean, precise, already clotting. Cashin tore a strip from his shirt and wrapped it around the wound with practiced efficiency. How do you feel? He asked. Light, cold. She looked up at him, and the world seemed sharper somehow. She could see the individual threads in his coat, hear the distant drip of water somewhere in the darkness. Is this normal? The bond. It will fade in a few hours. He finished tying off the bandage. Can you stand? I think so. He helped her to her feet, and Alara realized the tremor in his hands had stopped. Color, what little a vampire had returned to his face, and when he moved, it was with the same fluid grace she'd seen in the cottage. Thank you, he said quietly. That was brave, foolish but brave. You're welcome. Alara steadied herself against the wall. Now what? Cashin glanced at the tunnel entrance, where torchlight now danced across the stones. Now we go deeper. There's an old exit that leads to the forest. If we can reach it before they cut us off. A figure stepped into the chamber. The hunter was young, barely older than Alara, with a crossbow raised and fear bright in his eyes. He took in the scene. Cashin standing, the blood on his mouth, Alara's bandaged wrist, and his face twisted with rage. Monster, he spat. Cashin moved in front of Alara, his body, a wall between her and the weapon. Leave, now. You don't want this fight. You're poisoned, dying. The hunter's hands shook on the crossbow. My father said House Noctis would burn for what you did to his family. Looks like he was right. Your father, Cashin said slowly, was a traitor who sold his house's secrets to human nobles for gold. He was executed by his own people, not mine. But I suppose that's not the story you were told. Liar. The hunter's finger moved toward the trigger. Cashin blurred. One moment he was standing still. The next, he was across the chamber, the crossbow torn from the hunter's hands and crushed to splinters. The young man stumbled back, terror replacing his anger, but Cashin didn't pursue. Go, Cashin said, his voice deadly calm. Tell your friends that House Noctis has claimed sanctuary over this woman. Any harm that comes to her will be answered in blood. Do you understand? The hunter nodded frantically, then turned and fled. Alara released a breath. She didn't know she'd been holding. You let him go. Killing him would have solved nothing. His friends would have come for vengeance, then their families, then their children. Cashin turned back to her, and there was something ancient and weary in his expression. I've lived through enough cycles of violence. Alara, I won't start another if I can avoid it. She studied him, this creature who could have torn the hunter apart but chose mercy instead, who drank only what he needed and no more, who had protected her from men who wanted her dead. What did he mean about sanctuary? She asked. It's an old law. If a vampire of sufficient rank claims protection over a mortal, other houses must honor it or face collective punishment. He picked up the lamp. It won't stop the hunters, but it will make them hesitate. And what does it mean for me? Cashin met her eyes, and something complicated passed across his face. It means you're under my protection now, formally, until the threat passes or you release me from the obligation. So I'm what? Your responsibility? In a manner of speaking, he started toward the far tunnel. It also means you'll need to come with me. The hunters know where you live. Staying here would be suicide. Alara's stomach dropped. Come with you where? Somewhere safe. He paused, glancing back at her. Somewhere they won't dare follow. The way he said it made her skin prickle with unease. Where? She pressed. Cashin's expression was unreadable in the lamplight. House Noctis. The court of the Northern Vale. A vampire court. Yes. Ilara looked back at the tunnel where the hunter had fled, then down at her bandaged wrist, then at the impossible man who had upended her entire world in the space of an hour. She thought of her quiet cottage, her plans to disappear, the normal life she'd tried so desperately to rebuild. All of it was ash now. Lead the way, she said. Chapter 4. The cross-inked tunnel opened into the forest 2 miles from the cottage, emerging behind a waterfall that had run dry for the season. Dawn was still hours away, but the rain had stopped, leaving the woods draped in heavy mist. Cashin paused at the entrance, scanning the darkness with preternatural focus. Alara stood behind him, shivering in her thin sweater, the lamplight doing nothing against the cold that had seeped into her bones. We need to move quickly, he said. The hunters will realize where this leads soon enough. How far is your court? On foot? 3 nights. He turned to her, taking in her trembling frame with a frown. You won't survive that. Not after blood loss. I'm fine, Alara lied, though her legs felt like water and her head swam with every movement. Cashin made a low sound of disapproval. Before she could protest, he shrugged out of his coat and draped it over her shoulders. The fabric was still damp from the rain, but it held a strange warmth, not body heat exactly, but something older, like stone that had absorbed the sun. I don't need, you're in shock and you've lost blood. Don't be stubborn. He extinguished the lamp, plunging them into darkness. Stay close. The forest isn't safe at night. Because of vampires? Alara meant it as a joke, but her voice came out hollow. Among other things, he started into the trees, and Alara hurried after him, the coat swallowing her frame. The bond from his feeding still hummed faintly in her veins. She could sense him ahead of her even in the pitch black. A cold point of awareness that pulled at something deep in her chest. They walked in silence for what felt like hours. The forest pressed in around them, ancient oaks and pines looming like sentinels. Occasionally, Cashin would stop, his head tilted as if listening to sounds she couldn't hear, then motion for her to continue. What are you listening for? Alara finally asked. Other vampires? Hunters? Anything that might take an interest in us. He glanced back at her. You're doing well considering I've been attacked, bitten, and dragged into a tunnel system under my grandmother's house. Yes, most mortals would be hysterical by now. Alara thought about that. She probably should be hysterical. But hysteria required energy she didn't have, and screaming wouldn't change the fact that her life had been shattered beyond recognition. My grandmother used to tell me stories, she said quietly, about the old families who lived in the forest. The ones who didn't age, who kept to themselves, who helped the village when disease came or raiders threatened. I thought they were just fairy tales. They weren't. No, she pulled his coat tighter around herself. Why did you help us? Why make bargains with humans at all? Cashin was quiet for a long moment, navigating around a fallen tree. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of memory. Because we're not the monsters you've been taught to fear. We were human once, most of us. We remember what it was like to be fragile, to fear the dark. He paused. And because isolation breeds madness. Your grandmother understood that. She gave us a reason to stay connected to the mortal world, to remember why we chose to survive. Chose? Alara caught the word. Vampirism is a choice? In most cases, yes. The turning requires consent, or it fails. He ducked beneath a low branch. There are stories of forced turnings, but they rarely produce stable vampires. The mind rebels. Better to let someone choose damnation with clear eyes than force it upon them. The casual way he said damnation made Alara's skin prickle. Do you regret it? Choosing? Every day. The words were soft, almost lost in the rustle of leaves. And not at all. Before Alara could ask what he meant, Cashin stopped abruptly. His hand shot out, catching her arm and pulling her behind him. What quiet. His voice had gone deadly soft. Alara froze. In the distance, she heard voices. Not the hunters from before, these were different. Cultured, amused, speaking a language she didn't recognize. Cashin's entire body had gone rigid. House Corvus, he breathed. Here. Why would they? A woman's laugh cut through the darkness, bright and cruel. Cashin Noctis. It's been an age. 3 figures materialized from the mist, moving with the same inhuman grace Cashin possessed. The woman in front was beautiful in a way that hurt to look at. Porcelain skin, raven black hair, eyes like chips of amber. She wore a gown that belonged in a different century. All black silk and silver embroidery. Flanking her were 2 men, both dark-haired, both watching Cashin with open hostility. Lady Corvus. Cashin's voice had gone flat, carefully neutral. You're far from your territory. As are you. The woman's gaze slid past him to Alara, and her smile widened. With Immortal. No less. How quaint. Is this the gatekeeper's granddaughter? Alara felt Cashin's hand tighten on her arm. A warning. She's under my protection, he said, so we heard. Your little hunter messenger was quite forthcoming before we silenced him. Lady Corvus took a step closer, and Alara caught the scent of roses and decay. The question is why House Noctis would waste resources protecting a mortal who knows too much. Unless. Her eyes narrowed, studying Alara with unnerving intensity. You fed from her. It wasn't a question. Fresh blood. I can smell it on you both. She laughed, delighted. Oh, Cashin. After 2 centuries of rigid control, you finally bent. How delicious. The circumstances were. I don't care about your circumstances. Lady Corvus waved a dismissive hand. What I care about is the fact that you've claimed sanctuary over a mortal during a time of war. Do you know what message that sends to the other houses? There is no war, Cashin said coldly. Not yet. But there will be. She smiled, showing too many teeth. The old treaties are failing, Cashin. House Corvus has already declared independence from the Northern Court. Others will follow. And when they do, every mortal with knowledge of our existence becomes a liability. Alara knows nothing. Her grandmother did. That's enough. Lady Corvus gestured, and her companions moved to flank them. House Corvus formally requests you surrender the mortal to our custody. We'll ensure her silence. Permanently. Alara's heart hammered against her ribs. She felt Cashin shift his stance, positioning himself more fully between her and the Corvus vampires. Request denied. Lady Corvus's smile vanished. You would risk open conflict over a human? She'll be dead in 50 years regardless. 50 years is still 50 years. You're being irrational. I'm being honorable. There's a difference. Cashin's voice dropped, taking on an edge that made the air feel colder. The girl is under House Noctis protection. The law is clear. If you want her, you'll have to go through me. The tension ratcheted impossibly higher. Alara could feel violence gathering in the air like a storm about to break. Lady Corvus studied Cashin for a long moment, then laughed a sound like breaking glass. Very well. But when this ends badly, don't say I didn't warn you. She turned to leave, her companions falling into step behind her. Give my regards to your lord, Cashin. Tell him House Corvus remembers the old slights. We'll be settling accounts soon. Then they were gone, melting back into the mist as if they'd never been there at all. Cashin didn't move for a full minute, his body still coiled tight. Finally, he exhaled and released Alara's arm. We need to move faster, he said. They'll report this to their lord. We have perhaps a day before House Corvus decides formal law doesn't matter anymore. Alara's voice came out shaky. What happens then? Cashin met her eyes, and what she saw there made her stomach drop. Then they come for us in force. And I won't be able to stop them alone. Chapter 5. The safe house. He reached the safe house just before dawn. It was a cottage smaller than Alara's grandmother's, built into the hillside and camouflaged by overgrown ivy and moss. Cashin had pushed them hard through the night, moving at a pace that left Alara's legs burning and her lungs raw. She'd stumbled twice, and both times he'd caught her without breaking stride. Now, as pale gray light began to touch the eastern sky, he unlocked the door with a key that looked older than the building itself. Inside, he said, his voice tight with urgency. Alara didn't argue. She could feel his anxiety through the bond of growing pressure. Like walls closing in. Sunrise. It affected him more than she'd realized. The interior was sparse. A single room with a bed, a table, 2 chairs, and a fireplace cold with ancient ash. Heavy shutters covered the windows, sealed with what looked like wax and marked with symbols similar to the ones in her grandmother's cellar. Cashin moved immediately to check each shutter, testing the seals with methodical precision. Satisfied, he turned to the corner where a trapdoor was set into the floor. "There's a cellar," he said. "Supplies, blankets, water." He pulled the door open, revealing a ladder descending into darkness. "I'll be down there during the day. Don't open it unless the house is on fire." "Why not?" "Because day sleep isn't natural sleep. We're vulnerable, exposed." He straightened, and Alara saw the exhaustion etched into his features. The wound on his side had closed, but healing had cost him. "If something wakes me before sunset, I won't be myself. I could hurt you without meaning to." The admission hung between them, heavy with implication. "I understand," Alara said quietly. "Do you?" Cashin crossed to her, and in the dim light filtering through the shutters, his eyes had taken on that unsettling glow again. "Because I'm not certain you do. You've been remarkably calm about all of this, the attack, the feeding, the vampires in the forest. But shock wears off, Alara, and when it does, you're going to realize exactly how much danger you're in. I already know." "No, you know, intellectually. You don't feel it yet." He reached out, his fingers hovering near her bandaged wrist, but not touching. "When you do, you might decide I'm the greater threat. That running from me is safer than staying, is it?" "I don't know." The honesty in his voice surprised her. "I want to believe I can protect you. But House Corvus won't be the only ones interested in a mortal under Noctis protection. And I'm one vampire against potentially dozens." Alara looked at him, really looked past the inhuman grace and predatory stillness to the man beneath. He was afraid, not for himself, but for her. For what? His protection might cost them both. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "You paid your debt to my grandmother. You could have left me in that cottage." "I could have." He let his hand drop. "I should have, but you didn't." No, something flickered in his expression, regret, longing, she couldn't tell. "Your grandmother once told me that the measure of who we are isn't what we are, but what we choose to protect. I've spent 200 years trying to prove I'm more than a monster. Perhaps this is just another test." The vulnerability in those words made Alara's chest ache. She thought about her own choices, running from scandal, hiding in her grandmother's cottage, choosing isolation over the risk of being hurt again. "We're both trying to prove something." Then, she said softly. Cashin's gaze sharpened. "What are you trying to prove?" "That I'm not as broken as I feel." The words came out before she could stop them, raw and honest. "That I can still be brave when it matters." For a moment, they simply looked at each other, two people standing on the edge of something neither fully understood. Then the light through the shutters strengthened, and Cashin flinched. "I have to go down," he said. "There's food in the cellar, dried meat, bread. It's not fresh, but it's edible. Rest. When the sun sets, we'll continue north." He moved toward the trapdoor, then paused. "Alara?" "Yes, if House Corvus comes during the day." He didn't finish the sentence, but she understood. If they came while he slept, she'd be alone. Defenseless. "I'll bar the door," she said. "I'll be quiet. I'll survive." "You're stronger than you know," Cashin said quietly. Then he descended into the darkness. Alara closed the trapdoor and dragged the table over it, adding the chairs for good measure. Then she stood in the silent cottage, utterly alone for the first time since the knock at her door. The enormity of it finally hit her. She was in a strange house, miles from civilization, protected by a vampire who'd admitted he might not be able to save her. The hunters wanted her dead. House Corvus wanted her dead. And somewhere beneath her feet, Cashin lay in whatever death-like state vampires called sleep. Her knees buckled. Alara sank to the floor, her back against the wall, and let herself shake. The terror she'd been holding back since midnight crashed over her in waves, the crossbow bolts, the blood, the cold press of Cashin's teeth against her wrist, the casual cruelty in Lady Corvus's eyes. She was going to die. Maybe not today, but soon. And there was nothing she could do about it. No. The thought came sharp and clear, cutting through the panic. She'd survived her fianki's betrayal. She'd survived her sister's cruelty and the village's whispers. She'd chosen to come here, to her grandmother's cottage, because she refused to let them break her. She wouldn't let vampires break her either. Alara pushed to her feet, wiping her eyes. The cottage was small, but she searched it methodically, checking for weapons, exits, anything useful. In a cupboard, she found what Cashin had promised: dried provisions, water, skins, extra blankets. And something else, a box, small and wooden, carved with protective symbols. Inside were letters. Dozens of them, written in her grandmother's careful hand, addressed to Cien Cashin Noctis. Elara's fingers trembled as she unfolded the first one. Dear Cashin, the fever has passed through the village. 12 souls saved because you brought the medicine when no other source remained. The mothers won't know it was you. But I do. Thank you. As always, you Elara. Read another. Then another. Years of correspondence, detailing small acts of protection, moments of quiet cooperation between her grandmother and the vampire sleeping below. In the letters, she saw a different picture than the stories she'd been told. Not a monster making bargains for his own gain, but someone trying desperately, persistently to do good in a world that hated what he was. The last letter was dated a week before her grandmother died. Dear Cashin, if you're reading this, I'm gone. My granddaughter will come to the cottage soon. She doesn't know about you, about any of this. I kept her ignorant to keep her safe, but safety and ignorance aren't the same thing. If trouble finds her, and I fear it will protect her as you once protected me. Not because you owe me, but because she deserves the chance. I had to choose her own path, even if that path is strange and dangerous. She's stronger than she knows. Just like you. Always you. Elara's vision blurred with tears. Her grandmother had known, had planned for this, had trusted Cashin with her life even in death. Above her, a bird called out sharp and sudden. Elara's head snapped up, her heart racing. But the cottage remained quiet, the shutters secure. She carefully returned the letters to their box and placed it back in the cupboard. Then she barred the door, wrapped herself in Cashin's coat, and settled near the trapdoor with a kitchen knife in her hand. If the Corvus vampires came, she'd make them work for it. If they didn't, she'd be ready when the sun set. Either way, she'd survive. Chapter 6. Nightfall Confession. Elora didn't sleep. She sat with her back against the wall, the knife balanced on her knees, watching the thin lines of light beneath the shutters shift and fade as the sun crossed the sky. Every sound made her tense, the creak of settling wood, the rustle of leaves outside, the distant call of animals in the forest. But no one came. By the time the light began to dim, her body ached with exhaustion and her mind felt scraped raw. She'd spent hours cycling through fear, anger, grief, and a strange, desperate hope that somehow this would all work out. The moment the last light disappeared, the trapdoor shifted beneath the table. Elara scrambled to her feet, pulling the furniture aside. Cashin emerged from the darkness below, and the change in him was startling. The gray pallor was gone, replaced by something that almost looked like health. His movements were fluid again, certain, and his eyes had lost their fevered quality. You're awake, he said, noting her defensive posture and the knife still clutched in her hand. You said sunset. Elara lowered the blade, but didn't set it down. I was ready, so I see. Something that might have been approval flickered across his face. Did anyone come? No, it was quiet all day. Good. He climbed fully out of the cellar, then paused, his gaze sharpening. You found the letters. It wasn't a question. Elara glanced at the cupboard, then back at him. I was looking for supplies. I didn't mean to pry. They weren't hidden. Cashin moved to the fireplace, kneeling to arrange kindling with practiced efficiency. Your grandmother wanted you to find them, I think. If something happened to her, she trusted you. Elara set the knife on the table. The letters made that clear. She was one of the few who did. He struck flint, coaxing a small flame to life. Most mortals see vampires as predators at best, abominations at worst. Your grandmother saw us as complicated. Are you complicated? Cashin sat back on his heels, watching the fire grow. We're what we were as humans, magnified. The angry become wrathful. The greedy become insatiable. The lonely become, he trailed off. Become what? Elara prompted softly, desperate. The word was barely audible. We don't age, don't die easily, but we still need connection, purpose, something to anchor us, so we don't drift into the centuries and forget why we chose to keep existing. Elara lowered herself into one of the chairs, the exhaustion finally catching up with her. Is that what the houses are for? Anchoring? In theory. Cashin stood, dusting off his hands. In practice, they're more like feudal courts. Lords and ladies playing eternal games of power, making alliances and breaking them, fighting over territory and blood rights. He turned to face her. House Noctis is different. We've tried to remain apart from the politics, to focus on protection, Alara finished. Like the bargain with my grandmother. Yes, but that makes us weak in the eyes of houses like Corvus. They see compassion as a flawed exploit. He crossed to the window, checking the shutters again. Which is why bringing you to court is dangerous. There will be those who question my judgment, who see you as a liability. Then why risk it? Because the alternative is leaving you here to die. He said it simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. And I find I'm not willing to do that. The firelight cast shadows across his face, softening the harsh angles. Alara studied him, this ancient creature who could kill her with barely a thought but instead had fed carefully, fought hunters, and faced down rival vampires to keep her alive. You're not what I expected, she said. What did you expect? Something more. Monstrous, I suppose. Cruel. Inhuman. I am inhuman, Cashin said quietly. Don't mistake restraint for humanity, Alara. I've killed. I've fed from the dying. I've watched empires rise and fall and felt nothing. He turned from the window. But your grandmother taught me that feeling nothing is its own kind of death. So I chose to feel again, to care, even when it hurts. Does it hurt now? He looked at her for a long moment, something raw and unguarded in his expression. Yes, the single word carried the weight of centuries. Alara felt the bond between them pulse fainter than before, but still there, a silver thread connecting her heartbeat to his stillness. Through it, she sensed the edges of what he was, vast and old and achingly lonely, held together by sheer will and the memory of what it meant to be human. I read what my grandmother wrote, she said. About me being stronger than I know. About deserving the chance to choose. You do deserve that. Then tell me the truth. Alara leaned forward. What happens when we reach your court? Really? Not the version where everything works out, but the real version. Cashin was silent for a moment, then moved to sit in the chair across from her. When he spoke, his voice was measured, honest. You'll be presented to Lord Noctis, the head of our house. He'll assess the threat you pose, what you know, what you might reveal, whether you can be trusted. If he judges you safe, you'll be granted temporary sanctuary while we deal with the hunters and House Corvus. And if he doesn't judge me safe, then he'll offer you a choice, binding your silence through blood oath, or, he hesitated, or becoming one of you. Alara finished, her stomach nodding. It's not a fate I would wish on anyone. Cashin's hands tightened on the armrests. But it would make you protected by vampire law, untouchable by mortal hunters. And if done right, with consent and preparation, it's not the horror stories suggest. Would you do it? Turn me, if that's what your lord demanded. No, the answer was immediate, fierce. I would refuse, even if it cost me my position in the house. Why? Because you should make that choice freely, if you make it at all. Not as a last resort, not as a punishment. He held her gaze. And because I've seen what forced turnings do to people. The bitterness, the rage. I won't do that to you. Alara's throat tightened. You'd give up your house for me? A stranger? You're not a stranger anymore. Cashin's voice softened. The moment I took your blood, the moment I claimed sanctuary over you, that changed. You're under my protection. That means something to me. It means you care. The words came out as a whisper. Yes, he didn't look away. I care, which is dangerous for us both. The fire crackled between them, filling the silence. Alara thought about everything that had happened in the past day, the terror, the violence, the strange intimacy of the feeding. She thought about the letters, about her grandmother's trust, about the vampire sitting across from her who'd chosen honor over safety. I'm scared, she admitted, but I'm not sorry I let you in, that I offered my blood. You should be. It's complicated, everything. Maybe. Alara managed a small smile. But you said it yourself. We're all complicated. Something shifted in Cashin's expression, surprise, perhaps, or the beginning of something deeper. Before he could respond, he went rigid, his head snapping toward the door. What Alara started, quiet, his hand shot out, gripping her wrist. Through the bond, she felt his alarm spike. There's someone outside. The door shuddered under a heavy blow, then a voice, cold and amused, called through the wood. Cashin Noctis. House Corvus requests an audience. Come out, and we'll make this quick. Alara's heart stopped. They'd found them. Chapter 7. The siege Cashin moved with silent precision, pulling Alara away from the door and positioning her behind the table. His entire demeanor had changed, no longer the weary, conflicted man from moments before, but something cold and tactical. How many? Alara whispered. He tilted his head, listening. 4 outside, maybe more in the trees. Can we fight them? No, the answer was blunt. Not 4-on-1 with you as a vulnerability they can exploit. The door shuttered again, harder this time. Wood splintered around the hinges. We're being courteous, Cashin, the voice called. But our patience has limits. Send out the girl and we'll let you walk away. Lord Corvus is willing to overlook this. Lapse in judgment, liar, Cashin muttered. He turned to Alara, gripping her shoulders. Listen carefully. There's a window in the cellar, boarded up. Too small for a vampire. But you can fit. It leads to a ravine. Follow it north until you reach the river, then I'm not leaving you. Alara, I said no. She met his eyes, her jaw set. You stayed to protect me. I'm not abandoning you to die. You can't help me fight vampires. Maybe not. She glanced around the cottage, her mind racing. But I can think like a human. And humans are good at being unpredictable. The door exploded inward. 2 vampires entered, first a man and a woman, both dressed in the dark, archaic clothing that seemed to be House Corvus's style. Behind them, Lady Corvus herself stepped through, flanked by a massive vampire who had to duck beneath the doorframe. Such a charming little nest, Lady Corvus purred, her amber eyes sweeping the room. Playing house with Immortal, Cashin? How domestic. Cashin positioned himself between them and Alara, every line of his body coiled for violence. This is neutral ground. Ancient law protects safe houses. Ancient law. Lady Corvus laughed. You still cling to those dusty rules? The world has changed, Cashin. The old ways are dying. Then you're breaking treaty. There is no treaty. House Corvus withdrew from the northern court at the new moon. We answer to no one now. She took a step closer, and the other vampires spread out, flanking her. Which means this mortal is fair game. She's under my protection. A protection you can't enforce. Look around, darling. It's 4 against 1. Lady Corvus's smile was all teeth. Be reasonable. Give her to us, and we'll even let you report back to your precious lord. Tell him House Corvus is coming for everything Noctis has hoarded. Alara's mind raced. 4 vampires, all faster and stronger than Cashin, even if he were at full strength. The cottage had one door now destroyed and windows sealed from the inside. The cellar window Cashin mentioned was too small for him to use, which meant if she ran, she'd be leaving him to certain death, unless, her eyes fell on the fireplace. The flames were still small, but growing, and above the mantel, she'd noticed earlier, were old iron hooks, the kind used for hanging pots, but also for holding dried herbs and oil lamps. Cashin, she said quietly, do you trust me? She felt his confusion through the bond, but he didn't look back. What are you? Do you trust me? A pause. Then, yes. When I move, run for the cellar. Don't argue. Before he could respond, Alara grabbed the lamp from the mantel and hurled it at the nearest vampire. The glass shattered against the woman's chest, oil splashing across her dress. For a moment, everyone froze in surprise. Then Alara grabbed a burning stick from the fireplace and threw it. The vampire shrieked as flames erupted across her torso. The sound was inhuman, high and piercing, full of rage and pain. She stumbled backward, clawing at the fire, and the male vampire beside her lunged forward to help her. Now, Alara shouted. Cashin moved. He grabbed Alara around the waist and dove for the trapdoor, yanking it open and pulling them both through. They tumbled into the darkness below, and he slammed the door shut above them just as something heavy crashed into it from above. The window, he said urgently. Go. Not without, I'll follow. I need to seal the entrance. He was already moving, dragging a heavy chest across the cellar floor. Go, Alara. Above them, the vampires were shouting, furniture being thrown aside. Smoke began to seep through the cracks in the trapdoor. The cottage was burning. Alara found the window, a narrow opening near the ceiling boarded with rotting planks. She grabbed a piece of broken furniture and used it as a lever, prying the boards loose. Cold night air rushed in. Cashin. Almost, he grunted as he shoved the chest into place. The trapdoor shuddered under repeated blows, but held. Out. Now. Alara squeezed through the window, scraping her arms raw on the rough wood. She dropped into a shallow ravine, landing hard on stones slick with moss. A moment later, Cashin flowed through the opening with impossible grace, landing silently beside her. From above, the cottage was fully engulfed, flames licking toward the sky. Alara heard screaming, the vampire she'd set on fire. She realized with a sick feeling, and then a crash as part of the roof collapsed. Move, Cashin said, pulling her deeper into the ravine. They ran, behind them. She heard Lady Corvus's voice rise above the chaos, shrill with fury. Find them. I want them both dead before dawn. The ravine twisted through the forest, narrow and treacherous. Ilara's lungs burned, her legs, screaming in protest. But Cashin kept her upright, half carrying her when she stumbled. The bond between them pulsed with his urgency, his fear for her mixing with something else, pride, maybe, or respect. That was insane, he said as they ran. Brilliant but insane. Did it work? One of them is badly burned. The others will be slowed by helping her. He pulled her around a sharp turn. You bought us time. How much? Maybe an hour. Maybe less. They emerged from the ravine onto a rocky hillside. Below them, the forest stretched dark and endless. Above, stars glittered coldly. Somewhere in the distance, Ilara heard voices calling to each other, coordinating their search. Cashin stopped, scanning the horizon. The river is 3 miles east. If we can reach it before they catch our trail, Cashin. Ilara gripped his arm. How far to your court? 2 nights at full speed. But you can't. I can. She looked up at him, her jaw set. I'm not stopping. I'm not giving up. We get to your court, we get help, and we end this. He stared at her, something like wonder in his expression. You set a vampire on fire. She was going to kill you. Yes, but most mortals would have run. I'm not most mortals. Ilara managed a shaky smile. Apparently, for a moment, Cashin simply looked at her, this fragile human who'd thrown fire at creatures that terrified her, who'd refused to leave him behind, who'd somehow become more important to him than 2 centuries of careful isolation had prepared him for. Then he cupped her face in his cold hands and kissed her forehead. Brief and fierce. No, he murmured against her skin. You're not. Before Ilara could process what had happened, he stepped back, taking her hand. Come on, he said. We have a long way to go. They ran east, toward the river, toward hope, with House Corvus hunting behind them. Chapter 8. The river's edge. They reached the river as the first gray light of pre-dawn touched the eastern sky. Ilara collapsed on the rocky bank, her body shaking with exhaustion. Every muscle screamed. Her hands were torn and bleeding from scrambling over stones, and her lungs felt like they'd been scraped raw. But they'd made it. Behind them, the forest had gone quiet. Either House Corvus had lost their trail, or they were regrouping. Cashin paced the shoreline, his movements growing more agitated as the sky lightened. The river was wide here, black water churning over hidden rocks, moving fast with autumn rain. There's a bridge 2 miles downstream, he said, his voice tight. We can cross there, find shelter before. He stopped mid-sentence, his head snapping toward the tree line. Ilara struggled to her feet. What is it? They're coming. He turned to her, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw genuine fear in his eyes. Fast. They must have picked up our scent at the ravine. How long? Minutes. He looked at the sky, at the steadily growing light, and something like despair crossed his face. I won't make it to the bridge. Not before sunrise. Ilara's heart dropped. What are you saying? I'm saying you need to cross the river. Now. There's a town on the other side, Millbrook. Find the church. Tell the priest you're under House Noctis protection and wait for nightfall. I'll find you. No, Ilara grabbed his arm. We stay together. Ilara, I can't. There has to be another way. A cave, somewhere dark, anything. Even if there were, I'd be helpless, vulnerable. If they find me during day sleep. He gripped her shoulders, forcing her to meet his eyes. Listen to me. You've been brave, impossibly brave, but this is where it ends. Cross the river, survive. That's the only thing that matters now. Voices echoed through the trees. Closer now. Ilara's mind raced. The river was too wide to swim, too fast to wade. The bridge was miles away, and the sun was coming. Cashin couldn't run anymore, couldn't fight, couldn't. Her eyes fell on the water. On the shadow beneath the bridge pilings, visible in the distance. The bridge, she said suddenly. Is there space underneath? Between the supports and the water? Cashin followed her gaze. Possibly, but it would be dark, shaded. She turned to him. Could you survive there? Just for the day? It's not designed for shelter. The water level, the exposure. He stopped, understanding dawning. It might work. If I can wedge myself into the support structure, stay above the waterline, then we try it. I'm not leaving you unconscious under a bridge while House Corvus hunts us. Ilara started toward the downstream path. Move, now. They ran. The sky was paling rapidly now, stars fading into gray. Alara could feel Cashin slowing beside her, his movements becoming sluggish, mechanical. The approaching dawn was pulling at him, dragging him toward the death sleep. He couldn't fight. The bridge loomed ahead, old stone, covered in moss, built by hands that had turned to dust centuries ago. Beneath it, the river churned and frothed, but there was a gap between the water and the lowest support beams. Narrow, but enough. Cashin stumbled, catching himself against the bridge wall. His skin had gone gray again, his eyes glassy. Can't. Much longer. The words came out slurred. I know. Alara grabbed his arm, bearing his weight. Come on, just a little further. She guided him down the rocky embankment to where the bridge met the water. The space beneath was treacherous slick stone, the roar of water, shadows that seemed to move and shift. But there, wedged between two support pillars, was a ledge barely wide enough for a body. There, she said. Can you reach it? Cashin looked at the ledge with the glassy-eyed focus of someone fighting unconsciousness. Without a word, he climbed, movements still graceful despite his fading strength, and wedged himself into the narrow space. His body fit perfectly, as if he'd done this before. Alara, his voice was fading. Go, church, safe, I'm staying. She climbed up beside him, squeezing into the tiny space between his body and the cold stone. I'm not leaving you helpless. Dangerous, everything's dangerous. She wrapped her arms around him, trying to share what little warmth she had. At least this way we're dangerous together. Through the bond, she felt his protest, his fear for her, his desperate wish that she would run. But the sun was crusting the horizon now, golden light spilling across the water. And his eyes were already closing, stubborn, human. The words were barely a whisper. Yes, Alara murmured. I am. He went still. It wasn't like sleep. There was no gentle transition, no slow relaxation into rest. One moment, Cashin was there present, aware, and the next he was simply gone. His body remained, cold and rigid as a corpse. But whatever made him had vanished into whatever darkness claimed vampires during the day. Alara held him tighter, trying not to think about how much he felt like a body in a tomb. Above them, she heard footsteps on the bridge. She froze, hardly daring to breathe. Through the gaps in the stone, she could see shadows moving, multiple figures, pausing at the center of the bridge. The trail ends here. A male voice, frustrated. They must have crossed, or jumped in. That was Lady Corvus, sharp with irritation. Either way, we've lost them. Should we search the other side? A pause. Alara pressed herself harder against the cold stone, praying they wouldn't think to look beneath the bridge. No, Lady Corvus said finally. The sun's up. If Cashin didn't make it to shelter, he's ash by now. And the girl can't have gotten far on her own. So we let her go? For now. She's mortal weak, slow, alone. We'll find her tonight. And when we do, she'll tell us everything about House Noctis's defenses before she dies. Lady Corvus's voice took on a cruel edge. I want her to suffer. For the humiliation. For my sister's burns. Footsteps retreated. The voices faded. Alara waited, counting her heartbeats, until silence settled over the bridge. Only then did she allow herself to breathe fully. They'd made it. For now. She looked at Cashin's still face, at the harsh lines softened by day sleep, and thought about what Lady Corvus had said. The girl can't have gotten far on her own. They thought she'd run, thought she'd abandoned him. They didn't understand. Alara settled more comfortably against the stone, keeping watch over the vampire who'd chosen to protect her. Her body ached, her hands still bled, and terror sat heavy in her stomach. But beneath it all was something else, a fierce, burning determination. She'd set a vampire on fire last night. She'd escaped House Corvus twice. She'd watched Cashin fight and bleed, and choose her safety over his own again and again. When night fell, they would finish the journey to House Noctis together, and anyone who stood in their way would learn that underestimating a desperate human was a fatal mistake. Alara closed her eyes, letting exhaustion finally claim her, her hand resting over Cashin's silent heart. They would survive this. They had to. Chapter 9. Awaken. Angela awoke to the sound of water and the feeling of being watched. She jerked to pray, or tried to. The narrow ledge beneath the bridge left no room for sudden movement, and her stiff muscles protested violently. Gray afternoon light filtered through the stone supports above, painting everything in muted shadows. Cashin was awake. He sat perfectly still beside her, his gray eyes fixed on her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. The death-like pallor had faded, replaced by the usual cold vitality. But something in his expression was different. Unguarded. How long have you been awake? She asked, her voice hoarse. An hour. Perhaps more. He didn't look away. You were sleeping. I didn't want to disturb you. You've been watching me sleep for an hour? I've been trying to understand why you stayed. He shifted slightly, the movement controlled but tense. I told you to run, to save yourself. Instead, you climbed into a death trap with a monster who could have woken wrong and killed you without meaning to. But you didn't. That's not the point. Frustration bled into his voice. You can't keep risking your life for me, Alara. I'm not worth it. That's not your choice to make, isn't it? He turned to face her fully, and she saw the conflict warring in his expression. I'm 200 years old. I've lived a dozen lifetimes. You're mortal, you have maybe 50 years if you're lucky, and you're spending them running from vampires who want you dead because of me, because of a bargain my grandmother made, Alara corrected. Because House Corvus decided I'm a threat. You didn't create this situation, Cashin. You're just the only one trying to fix it, by dragging you deeper into danger with every choice I make. Alara studied him, the ancient creature who'd fought hunters, faced down rival houses, and somehow still believed he wasn't worthy of the protection he'd given her. Through the bond, she felt his turmoil, guilt, fear, and beneath it all, something deeper. Something that terrified him more than Lady Corvus or silver-tipped crossbows. He cared. And caring made him vulnerable in ways immortality never could. Listen to me, she said quietly. Last night, when I threw that lamp, I wasn't thinking about debts or bargains. I was thinking that you've been alone for centuries, trying to be good in a world that hates you for existing. And that maybe, just maybe, you deserve someone who won't abandon you when things get hard. Cashin's jaw tightened. Alara, I'm not finished. She reached out, her hand hovering over his. You asked why I stayed. It's because I know what it feels like to be left behind. My fiancé, my sister, everyone in that village, they all decided I wasn't worth the inconvenience. So when you tell me to run, to save myself, all I hear is another person deciding I'm not worth fighting for. That's not. He stopped, something shifting behind his eyes. You think I don't believe you're worth protecting? I think you don't believe you're worth protecting. Alara closed the distance, her hand finally settling over his. His skin was cold, but not dead, just different. But you are, Cashin. To me, you are. For a long moment, he simply stared at their joined hands. Then slowly, he turned his palm up, threading his fingers through hers. You're making this very difficult, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Making what difficult? Keeping you at a distance. Maintaining boundaries. He looked up, and the vulnerability in his eyes made her chest ache. I've spent 2 centuries avoiding attachments because everyone I've cared for has died. And here you are, mortal and fragile and impossibly brave, making me want things I have no right to want. Alara's heart hammered. What do you want? To keep you safe. To know you'll live a full life, grow old, die peacefully in your sleep, surrounded by people who love you. He squeezed her hand. And selfishly, impossibly, I want to be there for all of it. Even though it means watching you fade while I stay frozen in time. The confession hung between them, heavy with longing and loss. What if I don't want to fade? Alara heard herself say. The words came out before she'd fully thought them through, but once spoken, she realized they were true. What if I wanted to stay? With you? Cashin went very still. You don't know what you're saying. Don't I? You've explained what vampires are, how the turning works, blood freely given, consent required. She held his gaze. What if I consented? No, the word was sharp, almost harsh. Absolutely not. Why not? Because you've known me for 2 days, Alara. 2 days of running and fear and violence. That's not a foundation for making irreversible choices. He pulled his hand away, putting distance between them despite the cramped space. You're exhausted, traumatized, and bonded to me through blood. You're not thinking clearly. I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years. She shot back. For the first time since my life fell apart, I feel like I'm choosing something instead of just surviving. And I'm choosing you. This, whatever we're becoming. We're not becoming anything. We can't. Because I'm mortal? Because turning you would be taking advantage of your vulnerability. Because you deserve better than an eternity spent with someone you barely know. Because his voice cracked. Because I couldn't bear it if you grew to hate me for it. The pain in those words cut through Alara's argument. She saw it then, the real fear beneath his refusal. Not that she'd regret the turning, but that she'd regret him. I'm not asking you to turn me right now, she said softly. I'm asking you to stop pushing me away. To let this, she gestured between them, be whatever it needs to be. Without deciding for me what I can and can't handle, Cashin closed his eyes, his shoulders sagging. You're asking me to be selfish. I'm asking you to let someone care about you. That's not selfishness. That's trust. When he opened his eyes again, they were bright with something that might have been tears. If vampires could cry, I don't deserve you, he said. Maybe not. Alar managed a small smile. But you're stuck with me anyway. He laughed, a short, surprised sound that transformed his face. For a moment, he looked younger, lighter, like the man he might have been before immortality carved him into something harder. Then his expression shifted. Attention, snapping toward the bridge above. Someone's coming, he murmured. Multiple people, moving fast. Alar's brief moment of hope shattered. Corvus? No. His eyes narrowed, listening. House Noctis. They found us. Relief and fear warred in Alar's chest. Rescue, but also judgment. Whatever waited at the court, their journey there was about to end. Is that good or bad? She asked. Cashin's hand found hers again, squeezing once. I suppose we're about to find out. Chapter 10. The Northern Court. 3 vampires descended from the bridge with inhuman grace, landing on the rocks below without a sound. The leader was a woman, tall and imposing, with silver blonde hair bound in an intricate braid, and eyes the color of winter ice. She wore armor, actual armor, leather and steel that looked both ancient and well-maintained. The 2 behind her were younger, dressed in the same practical gear, hands resting on weapons at their belts. First blood, Cashin, the woman said, her voice carrying the weight of authority. Lord Noctis has been searching for you. When you failed to report after the safe house burned, we feared the worst. Cashin climbed down from the ledge, positioning himself between the newcomers and Alara. Commander Thalia, I didn't expect a rescue party. You claimed sanctuary over Immortal during wartime and then vanished. What did you expect? Thalia's gaze shifted to Alara, assessing. This is the gatekeeper's granddaughter. Her name is Alara Whitmore, Cashin said firmly. And yes, she's under my protection. So we heard. House Corvus has been quite vocal about your attachment. Thalia's tone was neutral, but Alara caught the implication. They've demanded Lord Noctis hand her over for questioning. They claim she possesses dangerous information about vampire territories and feeding grounds. She possesses nothing but her grandmother's cottage and the clothes on her back, Cashin said. Corvus wants her dead to send a message. Nothing more, perhaps. Thalia's eyes never left Alara. But that's for Lord Noctis to determine. You'll both come to court, immediately. It wasn't a request. Cashin's jaw tightened, but he nodded. We'll need horses. She's been running for 2 days, already arranged. Thalia gestured, and one of the younger vampires produced a dark cloak, offering it to Alara. The court is half a day's ride. We move now, before House Corvus realizes we've found you. Alara took the cloak with shaking hands, wrapping it around her torn, filthy clothes. Everything was happening too fast. Rescue, judgment, the court. She'd wanted to reach House Noctis, but now that salvation was here, all she felt was dread. Through the bond, she sensed Cashin's tension, his protective instincts warring with duty. She rides with me, he said. Thalia raised an eyebrow. Is that wise? The bond between you is none of your concern, Commander. A tense silence followed. Then Thalia inclined her head fractionally. As you wish. First blood. But Lord Noctis will have questions. Let him ask them. They climbed to the bridge, where 4 horses waited, massive creatures with eyes that reflected the fading light strangely. Vampire horses, Alara realized. Bred for night travel and preternatural speed. Cashin mounted first, then pulled Alara up in front of him. His arms came around her, steadying her against his chest, and despite everything, she felt safer than she had since this nightmare began. Hold on, he murmured against her ear. They'll ride hard. They did. The forest blurred past as the horses ran, moving at speeds that should have been impossible. Alara clung to Cashin's arms, feeling his cold solidity at her back, the steady presence that had become her anchor. The bond between them pulsed with each hoofbeat, his determination, his fear for her, and beneath it all, the thing they'd almost named in the shadows under the bridge. The sun set as they rode, plunging the world into darkness. But the vampires didn't slow. If anything, they moved faster, until Alara lost all sense of time and distance, surrendering to the rhythm of movement and the arms holding her safe. When they finally stopped, It was before a castle. Alara had expected something from fairy tales, crumbling ruins, Gothic towers, the stuff of horror stories. Instead, House Noctis rose from the mountain like it had grown there, all dark stone and clean lines, windows glowing with warm light. It looked lived in, real, almost welcoming. "Come," Thalia said, dismounting. "Lord Noctis is waiting." They entered through massive doors carved with protective symbols Alara recognized from her grandmother's cellar. Inside the castle was a strange blend of ancient and modern tapestries alongside electric lights. Stone floors worn smooth by centuries, beside furniture that looked contemporary, and vampires. Everywhere, they moved through the halls with purposeful grace, stopping to stare as Cashin passed with Immortal in tow. Alara felt their eyes like physical weight, curious, hostile, hungry. She pressed closer to Cashin and his hand found hers, squeezing once. "Steady," he whispered. "You've survived worse than curious stares." They climbed a spiral staircase and emerged into a great hall. At the far end, seated on a throne that looked carved from a single piece of obsidian, was Lord Noctis. He was beautiful in the way ancient things are beautiful, all sharp edges and perfect symmetry, with black hair that fell past his shoulders and eyes that held the weight of millennia. He watched them approach with an expression Alara couldn't read. "Cashin." The Lord's voice resonated through the hall, commanding without being loud. "You've caused quite a stir, my lord." Cashin bowed, and after a moment's hesitation, Alara did the same. "I claimed sanctuary over Immortal during a time when House Corvus has declared independence and threatened war." "Yes, I'm aware." Lord Noctis leaned forward. "The question is, why?" "She's the gatekeeper's heir. She possesses knowledge, she possesses nothing." Lord Noctis interrupted. "We both know that. House Corvus wants her dead to punish you for standing against them. To prove House Noctis is weak." His gaze shifted to Alara, and she felt pinned by it. "So I ask again, why?" Cashin's hand tightened on hers. "Because it was the right thing to do. The right thing." Lord Noctis repeated the words slowly, tasting them. "And the bond I sense between you, the blood you've shared, was that also the right thing?" Silence fell. Alara felt every vampire in the hall watching, waiting. "She saved my life," Cashin said quietly. "More than once. The bond was necessary for survival, and freely given on both sides." "I see." Lord Noctis stood, descending from his throne with fluid grace. He stopped before Alara, studying her with eyes that had watched empires rise and fall. "Alara Whitmore, your grandmother was a friend to this house. For her sake, I offer you sanctuary. But sanctuary comes with conditions." Alara's voice came out steadier than she felt. "What conditions?" "You will remain in House Noctis until the threat from Corvus is resolved. You will submit to questioning to ensure you possess no dangerous knowledge. And you will accept a blood seal, a binding that prevents you from speaking of what you learn here to any outside this court. And if I refuse?" Something that might have been respect flickered in Lord Noctis's eyes. "Then I will give you to House Corvus, and they will kill you." Slowly, he paused. "But you won't refuse. Because you're brave, and you're bonded to my first blood. And you understand that sometimes survival requires compromise." Alara looked at Cashin. Through the bond, she felt his conflict, his desire to protect her warring with his duty to his house. But beneath it all was trust. He believed she could handle this. She turned back to Lord Noctis. "I accept your conditions," she said. "All of them." Lord Noctis smiled, brief and cold. "Good. Then, welcome to House Noctis, Alara Whitmore." He gestured to Thalia. "Show her to the guest quarters. Cashin, you remain. We have much to discuss." As Thalia led her away, Alara looked back once. Cashin stood before his lord, shoulders straight, facing whatever judgment awaited. Their eyes met across the hall, and in that moment, Alara understood. Whatever happened next, interrogation, binding, war, they would face it together. The choice had already been made. The moment she'd offered her blood, the moment she'd refused to run, the moment she'd chosen him over safety. Now she just had to survive what came after.